Hi everyone, it's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. Did you know that it costs me money to produce each episode of this podcast? I'd really appreciate your help to keep my show on the air and helping other people. Please join me over on Patreon, where you can also find commercial-free episodes, and the links are in the show notes. Thanks so much. Hi everyone, welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. My guest today is Dr. Naomi Norton, who graduated from North Central University with her Ph.D. in family therapy. Her dissertation focused on how the white fundamental evangelical culture makes meaning about mental illness. She has an active private practice, is an assistant professor at National University, and is a program supervisor at Friends University. She's passionate about exploring how culture shapes meaning, especially within religion, and how it affects interpersonal and systemic functioning. I first became interested in chatting with Naomi when I learned about her white fundamentalist evangelical power and control wheel, and I'll provide links in the show notes from our episode today. Welcome, Naomi.
Hello, thank you. It's very nice being here.
It's such a delight. I remember when someone first brought up your power and control wheel in one of the groups that we belong to for colleagues with religious trauma experience, and I was hooked immediately. I thought that just sounded so brilliant because, of course, I've come across power and control wheel in other forms, but I hadn't seen it done this way. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I'm just super excited about it. Please tell us a little bit about your growing up. You're in the United States, I think.
Yes, I am. I grew up in Colorado in a independent fundamental Baptist home. It was very insular. A lot of my family life was either at church, which was also the school that we went to, or it was home. So it was very we really didn't get exposure to other cultures. And so it was really interesting as I went to college and got exposed to other people and demographics and way of thinking. And then
a secular college.
No, it was actually a Christian college.
Okay.
So I originally wanted to go to Moody Bible Institute. And then from there, I got put on the waiting list. And so I ended up going to Calvary Bible College out in Kansas City. And during that time, I really started reflecting on who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, which is very typical for that age group. But then also I really started experiencing a lot of significant trauma with my family of origin. And then I started, as I was going through that, I also started experiencing trauma from the religious culture, because a lot of them were telling me since I was an unwed female, it was my job to submit and obey my father. I just needed to keep, just pray, just keep doing what I'm doing. And so then I felt that internal struggle of how do I still be me, but also align with someone that is also hurting me. And so that created a lot of struggle for me. And so then I ended up actually getting into family therapy because I was curious in trying to understand my context and what happened. So how my family affected me. And so now I want to understand why that is, but then also learn how can I help support other people going through this. And so that led me into the marriage and family. And then I went to get my Ph.D. because I love family therapy and I love learning. I can't stop. It's a problem. And so within that, I got really curious more about the cultural context because it's really interesting. Because in my master's program, it's more of a secular college, it's actually Quaker. But they also did a lot of talking about diversity and how do you honor those spaces and everyone who comes into the client or the therapy room. And it was in the diversity course that it really started to hit me and just how people have different experiences in life. And I felt a lot of shame at first because I'm like, how did I not know this? I feel so far behind because my culture kept me so stuck in a certain worldview. And so then once they started, it was hard because they started asking questions and then my peers would sort of respond to me and I felt more abrasively. And I think they weren't understanding my own context of like, this is very new. Like, this is something a lot of people have been sitting with for most of their life. And I'm just now hearing this. And so that was huge in starting my exploration around culture and just how they affect how we make meaning. And so then when I went to my PhD, I really started to get curious in how does culture shape how we make meaning, especially within the religious context and how we interact with other people. So it's been really fascinating.
Wow, it sounds fascinating. You make school sound really fun, and so interesting. And so then you were raised, like you say, in a fairly insular environment. Do you have a bunch of siblings? You know, what was it? Were you going to church all the time? Your church was your school also, or it was the same kind of group? So you weren't having a lot of exposure there.
No, so within my family, I come from a divorced home, and so we ended up living with my paternal grandparents, which was really helpful and also very interesting living within the IFB culture and how they related to divorce. So that created some additional layers of trauma. But then I have an older sister, and then I'm also a triplet, and so there's two other of me.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So it was
You're my first triplet that I ever met. I'm so excited.
I know, we're exciting. So there were 7 of us in the household. And so we were very much, whenever the church doors were open, we were there. My grandmother was very dedicated to ministry. So she led a lot of the children's ministry. So we were expected to help out. So every Sunday we did something. We were there throughout the week. And then if there were missions conference, we were there. Well, and then as we got older, we also helped clean the church. So there were some days we were there 7 days a week of just being so centralized around that. And a lot of our friends were from the church as well. So it's like, we just all sort of stayed in the same, like, I want to say there's probably about like 30 families that just really stuck together.
So was the curriculum like ACE or Bob Jones or somebody else wrote it, or?
It was a lot of Abeka and Bob Jones. It wasn't uncommon for people to graduate from my school to go to Bob Jones or Pensacola or Faith. Those tend to be the main ones that.
Right. Wow. So if your grandmother was very involved in the church, then I'm guessing you were kept on a pretty short leash as far as what was acceptable and what was unacceptable in the family.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting because some of that I think is also related to my personality, but also tied into. So part of my history is when I was 5, I got saved. And a lot of it was after I heard a sermon about hell. And the pastor was talking about worms and gnashing of teeth and burning, and you won't know your family. And so I was petrified. And so that night I got saved so I could stay with my family and have connection and be with people. And so ever since then, I had so much anxiety that I created this space of I have to follow the rules because I don't want bad things to happen. And so I very much was a rule follower. I loved books. And so I was always reading. So I was very much isolated by myself. And if I did anything, it was mostly with my grandparents or my father. Like I tended to interact more with them than peers my age, and even my siblings.
And was your dad IFB?
Yes.
Okay.
IFB, very much into the purity culture and patriarchy, which added to some of my trauma when I went to college. So that was fun.
Wow. Yeah. So it's interesting how that all kind of feeds into itself there. I can totally relate to being an uber rule follower. You know, that was the only way I felt safe in my family as well. And so I was thrilled when I discovered ever more fundamentalist groups because there were more rules for me to follow and obey and to feel secure. So yeah, that's something that a lot of us go through.
It also added a layer of confusion because I'm sitting there, like, especially in college. So I'm like, I'm there following the rules, I'm doing what's expected, and I'm still getting hurt. And then I have people telling me, you need to just keep following the rules. If you just do what is expected, if you do what God wants you to do, then this won't be happening. And so that created some of that cognitive dissonance of like, what's wrong? Like, what am I doing to create this? And so I think that tended to highlight more of how the religious culture does not understand abuse dynamics and also understand, like, even within that prosperity gospel of just like you can be doing certain things and bad stuff still happens. It doesn't mean that you're not doing well or you're making poor choices or like sometimes life just happens. And so it was just an
Wow.
interesting space because I don't think many, at least from my history, not many understood why I was struggling because they're just like, you just follow God. It's not that difficult. And so
Wow.
it's
But
like,
whose interpretation
mhm,
of God? And certainly we find that, especially in the patriarchal system, there's no shortage of men who are very quick to tell us what
yeah.
God's interpretation and what God's will is
Mhm.
for our life. And that can be confusing, not to mention off-putting.
Absolutely. Well, and that was one thing too, like when I went into family therapy, that I was amazed in how, with the systemic structure, how they helped me learn how do you go put people within their context and be curious. Where it's like many times when I would talk to people, there's just an automatic formula approach of this is what you do and good things will happen. And then very different of stepping back and learning how do you sit with people because everyone's life experience is different. Even though they could have been raised in a similar family or similar structure, their experiences are different. And so how do
Mhm.
we honor them? And so I think that helped give me like a fresh perspective and almost that breathing room to be like, I can sit with people and I don't have to have an answer. Like just being with people is so healing. And that's most of the time, that's really what's most effective in therapy of just that
Mhm.
building that alliance and letting people have space to be them. And so I
Oh, yeah.
loved that within the family therapy training.
Excellent. And it's true, like even if someone didn't grow up religious, but say maybe they followed all the rules for excellent health. Maybe they are
Mhm.
like a strict vegan and they jog 5 miles a day and all this stuff. And then they have a heart attack or colon cancer or something horrible comes up. Um, so they might not be like blaming God per se. I got my air quotes out there, but it's there's a reckoning to be done with how they imagined the world was and how then they find out how the world actually is. And it's so jarring when
Mhm.
that happens. And we really go through a tremendous grieving process as we try and figure out, well, what is actually reality? Because I thought reality was this way. The truth is bad things can happen to good people no matter what, because sometimes random things just happen. And that's a bitter pill to swallow when we've been consuming the fantasy of
Yes.
religion for
Mhm.
sure. Wow.
And
And
it
so, go
creates
on.
that uncomfortableness, so, like, heightens anxiety because it's like, I was used to structure and it felt good, it felt secure because I knew what I needed to do to be okay, and then come back to, like, well, I can still do things and I may not, but also it's weird because 'cause I'm like, I can be okay and also struggle at the same time. Like, it doesn't take those away from each other, like, even that nuance, um, was interesting to hold of, like,
Yeah. The
I'm
both
okay
and
and I
instead
can
of the either
struggle.
or. Yes,
Mhm.
that's right. And so you it sounds like were fairly committed right from the time you were 5 and said these words. And by the way, I have a huge problem with people trying to encourage children to make any kind of oath, covenant, pledge, promise, lifelong. It's just inappropriate. It's unethical to demand that of children. It would never hold up in a court of law. So I just want to put that out there. And I too was converted from a very young age, of course, because I wanted to please my parents and I didn't want to go to hell. I didn't want to be separated from them. Um, did your siblings do likewise?
Yeah. From what I remember, most of them were saved at a young age or professed some sort
Mhm.
of conversion. Um, It is interesting, which I think a lot of it is related to my trauma and almost a level of dissociation because I don't remember a ton of my childhood. Like there's huge gaps. So it was interesting, especially like within the family therapy program of them having us do more of like the family origin and like really diving into our history. And I'm sitting there like, I have blurbs of memory, but overall I don't, which I think the more I processed through that, the more I was aware of how much I did dissociate. So I could stay within this high controlling religious culture that was so normalized that I felt like I had to somehow make it so I could survive there. And so I just naturally just dissociated.
Right. And I wonder too if there's additional pressures or burdens put onto triplets being one of three, because it's an unusual thing. It's like an extra blessing or something like that. It's just different, out of the ordinary, and religious people can use anything to put pressure on other people. So I don't know. That's just something really interesting. So in your teens, did you ever start doubting or wondering?
I did not. I personally was so focused on doing what was expected of me that looking back, I'm really embarrassed and ashamed. I was one of those people that would just go out and evangelize to anyone. Like there's one time that I was part of an all county orchestra and we had to go out of the county to do this retreat to practice. And so I was in this car with this Orthodox Jew and I talked to her for 2 hours trying to convert her and show her she was wrong all the way up. And then we did it all the way back. And looking back, like my family was proud of me because they're like, you did exactly what was expected. Like you were evangelizing. You're not afraid to share. And then now I'm like, that was so dishonoring of her. That was so like, that was not okay. But in my mind, I'm like, I can't even stop to think about other people's experiences or how this would come across to me if someone did it to me, because I just have to keep advancing the faith so I'm okay and that my family would be proud of me. And
wow. You were a great convert. You were very well indoctrinated.
Oh,
very
I was.
thorough.
So much. I think that's what shocked my father when I went to college because it was like a huge switch of, I don't think it was a huge switch, but I think starting to see how I started to explore my own independence. And I think noticing that where I wasn't so fully aligned under what he wanted. And so then you started to see more of these coercive control tactics start to happen.
Oh, yeah. And so have your siblings kind of stepped away, or have most of them kind of stayed within that same IFB realm? Like, are you a black sheep now?
Well, no, it's quite interesting. So I would say my older sister and then one of my oldest sister in the triplet set, that we don't really have a faith or a rigid IFB faith. My brother, the last I engaged with him, he was very much still involved with the church. Yeah.
And so was it a shock to them that you went to college at all? Or you were expected, as long as it was a Christian college, conservative Christian college, it was okay?
Yeah. So when I was younger, I wanted to be a missionary to the Aborigines in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
That was what I was dedicated to do. So that's one reason why I wanted to go to Moody Bible Institute, because that's where my father went. And that's like the hub for missionaries from where I grew up. And so then when I went to Calvary, I ended up shifting out of that of like, well, now I don't want to be a missionary anymore, but I don't know what I want to be. And so then I think that space created a lot of unknown. But I was the only one in my family that really wanted to go into ministry. That my older sister, she didn't go to college. I think she may have gone to some community college. My triplet sister didn't go to college. And then my brother, he completed his bachelor's degree after he went into the military. So he did the Marines first and then got his degree after.
Wow. Okay. And so was that around the time when you decided, no, I actually don't want to be a missionary? Is that when things kind of heated up with your dad as there was pushback against what he thought you should do?
Yeah, I think that was part of the catalyst. Like it's very complicated. I think some of it was that realization that who he thought I wasn't how I was behaving or acting. And so I think that space was a little concerning for him. So, I mean, he did push a couple of times of like, let's go back to missionary work. And you need to, like, I feel like you are deviating and getting distracted by your boyfriend and all of this, that you're separating from God's will for your life. Like, you need to go back to missions, and encouraging me to attend missions conferences and stuff. And I never followed through on that. But I think that was a huge letdown for him, because I think he was anticipating, which I mean, it's weird within the culture, because there's that sense of the more you do things for God, the more you sacrifice yourself, the higher elevated you are within the religious community. But at the same time, we're not going to say that, because it's all about God and not about us. But there's still very much like that status of we need to do things for God so other people can see how good of a Christian we are. So it's like a really weird dynamic.
Yeah.
And so I feel like some of that shifted, especially for my father, when there's that realization of, oh, well, I was going to have the status of a daughter who's in missions work who now is not there. So I think, yeah.
And were your grandparents also like, oh no, what is happening with our dear Naomi? What's she doing?
I don't think so. Like, they haven't said anything to my face.
Okay. All right. Did your relationship with your dad survive?
No. Yeah. It has not survived. My grandparents have. It's interesting because they're ones that are more, I want to say more inclusive, because there is that sense of still a lot of rigidity of thought, but also there's that space too of like, this is your life. Like, I don't agree, but also you're still welcome to come over for dinner, and you can still, like, we can still have a relationship. Where for my father, it was very different. Of like, if you're doing something that I feel like is a sin, then we can't have relationship until you repent, and then we can engage. And so it's interesting, like, seeing that generational skip, it seems like.
Yeah. Wow. And so then what was it when you started feeling like you were doing things right, but still you were encountering difficulties there? Was that in this context of you were trying to do what you thought was right, but you were having issues then with your dad?
Yeah. Looking back with my situation, a lot of it, I think, was tied more to the patriarchy and purity culture. Because growing up, I think there's probably an assumption that I was probably more asexual, because I did not have any boyfriend. Like, I was not into the boy bands. Like, I didn't really talk about any type of relationship. And so then I think when I got to college, well, backing up, when I was 16, we had the purity culture phase where I even got the purity, or my dad gave us a purity ring. And so we made a covenant. And so then looking back, I'm like, that's a weird dynamic, because it's like I ended up giving him control over my sexuality and not knowing that's what I was doing.
Right.
And so then when I got a boyfriend in college, then my father tended to get more reactive and more controlling of just like, oh, well, I need to protect your purity and your virginity. And even though we're states away and he has no idea what's going on, like, there's still that space of I get to control this. And then even after marriage, because I married my boyfriend, that there's still that space of you still have to come make it right, because you didn't start your marriage right because of all of this patriarchal and purity culture. Like, it's really, really twisted the family relationships.
Yeah, that's where the wheel that you created makes a lot of sense. And I just want to read out the name of it again to everyone. White fundamentalist evangelical power and control wheel. And it really at the inner circle, it talks about emotional abuse, male privilege, controlling sexuality, gender and reproduction, religious abuse, white privilege, isolation, and political religious right. And that's all encircled by something that says misusing scripture. And I think that is just so true. And people, it's like they don't even in some ways realize it. When we grow up in it, we're like that fish in the water. We don't recognize that we're in water. Everyone else is in the same water. So we don't even stop to think about it until, like you did, we start encountering people who think differently, even really good people, even kind-hearted, decent people that we can't fault other than they don't believe exactly the way we believe. And that is such a eye-opening experience.
Oh, it is. And I think it even gets more complicated within the system structures because the culture knows that if you experience different, if you get new information, that it can challenge what you've been taught. So they create this like rigid boundary where you can't interact with people outside, or we're going to make them seem as a threat. So that way you create boundaries, and either you attack them or you just disconnect. So that way they can keep more control over what information people have. And so that gets really hard when you keep hearing similar passages and references used a certain way, that then it ends up being like, well, this has to be what God wants. Like, this is the word of God, this is that. And so then it gets so instilled in who you are, which then is even more compounded when you add whatever you believe about your eternal salvation. Like, it makes it so much more scarier of like, it's not even just I'm going to experience pain on earth, but this could result in eternal damnation. And so it creates that level of fear where it's like, we can't, even if we wanted to step out, it's so scary to try to explore new information.
Right. And that makes me think of Dr. Steve Hassan's BITE model, and where if the different groups want to control our behavior, the information we're receiving, our thoughts and our emotions, BITE, we know that there's something going on there. It's like a high demand group or person. And we really need to be aware of that. And that's something that I work on with my clients when I'm doing one-to-one religious trauma recovery work, because again, if we were in it, we might not even be aware of it. And sometimes we'll cult hop, or we'll go from one group to another because we've been so primed to accept rigidity and authoritarian thinking. And it can feel scary to have to think for ourselves. Like, I don't know what that was like for you. Maybe you'll tell us. But when I started to think, you mean all those rules aren't there anymore? I found it really disorienting.
Oh, absolutely. And I think even to that space of learning, how do I trust myself and develop critical thinking skills? Because I was taught so much of, you don't need that. You just trust certain people or leaders or your father, like you just listen to them. And so now when I was in that space of trying to figure out what I believed, it's like, I don't know what to grasp to. I don't know how to navigate these waters, which then almost make you go back to what you know or feels more comfortable. Because it's like, at least this feels similar, like, and that felt safer, or at least it felt safer to my nervous system, not that it was naturally better for me.
I think sometimes almost like it can take so many times before a person is able to leave an unhealthy domestic abuse kind of situation. People have to generally try it several times before they actually are able to break away. And I think that can be the case also when we're talking about spiritual and religious abuse, particularly if we were raised in it, and then the different messages that we received, and then depending on the family of origin and how those messages were delivered and reinforced, depending on our own degree of self-esteem or self-love, confidence in ourselves, because we know codependency is also baked right into that whole Christian paradigm a lot of times, and where we think we exist to serve. That's what we exist for. That's the only, we need to be needed. That's it in a nutshell. And then if we get to a point where we start to recognize that's actually not true, and it can be profoundly unhealthy, and then we start tugging on that thread, and everything that seemed stable comes undone.
And it seems so scary too, because many times there's a framing of, you have to choose us, the community, and your family, or you can choose yourself. And so having to choose, like, break out of that to say I can still choose me and find another community, and also grieve the loss of the relationships that were really close to me, and they are family, which makes it even harder when it's like there is that sense of familial loyalty, and also blind loyalty to the culture, to be like, now I have to almost turn you aside in order to choose health, in order to choose myself. And how even within that framing, how it can feel bad or sinful to do that too, because it's like, then it's me and I'm being selfish. And so
Oh,
then
and
naturally
selfishness is terrible. That's what they tell us. But we actually know there's a degree of it that's healthy. We need to be able to make the choices that are right for us. But as you say, the potential losses are so great when we're looking at the loss of our identity. My entire identity was as a Christian wife, mother, homeschool mother. And then it was none of those things. I wasn't married anymore. I wasn't homeschooling anymore. And then I wasn't even a Christian anymore. And it was like, what has happened to my life, and who am I? And just really went into that existential free fall, and then trying to figure out, oh, what do I believe? Oh no, if I don't believe in hell, then maybe that means there's no heaven. Like everything that had seemed so foundational to me was up for grabs. And it was really confusing and scary and intoxicating. So liberating. Oh, you mean I don't have to? Oh, well, then anything's okay. Here I go. I'll deny myself nothing. I'm going to really dive in and have a great time and hope I survive it. And so there were a few years of just really kind of crazy, crazy times. And then eventually my feet, getting my feet centered on the bottom, on the rock, of my life, figuring out who I was and going, okay, what are my values? This is going to determine how I move forward in life and the relationships that I have. And then I had apologies to make to my daughters, who saw mom completely lose her mind and come untethered from everything. And the reason I even say it is just to let people know it's possible. Even if you feel like you're in a really terrifying space in that existential free fall right now, there are people like Naomi and me who are here and just waiting. We're ready to help if you need help. What was helpful for you?
For me, some of it was needing to be alone. As much as I didn't like it and it was painful to be alone, it also forced me to have to really work out what I believed. And forced me to learn how to find my voice, because there wasn't anyone else who could speak for me. And so that it was an interesting space. And then also like my boyfriend. So part of my journey entailed when I went through the abuse with my father, and then I got expelled from Calvary Bible College.
Ooh.
And then that day I got expelled, my boyfriend broke up with me. And so then I had 6 months of me just being by myself. And so that was really hard and excruciating. And then after those 6 months, my boyfriend and I got back together, and then we ended up getting married. It's like within those states, like he was a constant, even though there was a breakup. Like there's time where, as much as I hated it, I needed to be alone because I had so many influences telling me what to do. And as much as I was losing my identity, I'm like, I needed that space to figure out me. And then also knowing he was still there, like he was the one that held space for me when I was so angry and when I was going through the grief process. And so, and seeing my value, even when I didn't see it. And so he just was there. And so then I think between him and that alone time was the most helpful for me.
Yes. Yeah. I think people kind of can overlook the grief piece, which is huge. As far as I'm concerned, it's a massive, massive element to religious trauma. And then, of course, the recovery. We can't mourn what we don't acknowledge. We need to acknowledge, give ourselves permission to say that, you know what, it wasn't okay. There was lots that I experienced, even though my parents or grandparents, they meant well. But still, that was crappy. That was a lot that I went through, stuff that never should have been put on me in the first place. And then when it comes to mourning those losses, they're kind of ambiguous and disenfranchised. There's no body to bury. The relatives, the people are still alive, or even if it's our faith, the loss of our faith, there's no body to bury, and disenfranchised because people don't get it. Other people don't get it. That's just, and that makes the mourning even harder.
Absolutely, especially like that. Like I'll tell people, like many times it's almost like I'm walking around with internal wounds and people can't see it. And so like I'm bleeding and I'm suffering and they just expect me to get up and act normal and do what's okay and just like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, you don't see how much damage and how much wounds I'm carrying and how much my body's even trying to heal as I'm trying to operate and tend to other people. Yeah.
That's so true.
It's brutal.
It is. And yet, so I mean, people, even your boss might understand if your dog dies or you have to put your dog down or whatever it is. Oh my God, like take the afternoon, take the few days, whatever it is. And of course, if you lose a spouse or child, then we have larger spaces, components of time for grieving. But well, I just lost my entire identity and my worldview, all, and my belief system all in one thing. Oh, okay. Well, I'll expect you at work on Monday morning at 9:00. So what? You just stopped believing in Santa Claus. And that's so invalidating when it was our entire identity.
Absolutely. And it's excruciating to know that if society or cultures don't see or value something, then it's just dismissed. And so even within a lot of cultures, even thinking of religion, how there is a lot of abuse, how it's just bypassed because we don't see it and we don't recognize it, which I think is like one of those main components of recognizing the diversity and that we can trust people to share their lived experiences. And if they say something's hurting and if they're grieving or if they're struggling, that we're able to take note of that and honor that and not just be like, well, that's not a problem for me. Like, or that, why is that a big deal? You can still do your job. Like, just go do it. And so it's like that space of, we don't really value people. We don't really value their lived experiences. We only value what society or the larger dominant culture says we need to value.
Do you think we're getting better at that? I mean, I feel like for the first time in my life, and I'm 53, starting to grasp the whole idea of colonizing and how Christianity and white Christianity, went around colonizing nations and cultures and groups of people. And that's something that hadn't really been acknowledged in white society. And I'm in Canada. And so our First Nations people here have suffered tremendously. And it's only been in the last 5 years or less that our government has even started to acknowledge, yes, there were children who were murdered or died at the residential schools and they're buried on the properties without adequate graves, without letting the parents know. So we're kind of just collectively coming to terms with that. My hope is that we'll keep expanding that and we'll keep understanding and internalizing, oh, it's actually not just about me, it's about everybody.
Yes, I really hope so. I mean, it's interesting seeing like a cultural response to that because you see a lot of people like shifting of like even the reaction to critical race theory or Black Lives Matter movement. Like you see a lot of people pushing and distancing from that. And you also see other people not going to the other side, but like really challenging that and being like, hey, wait up. Like there's a lot of components in this that have a lot of merit and we really need to listen to and honor because so many people are getting hurt. And that's something even within my own journey, I had to wrestle with of even my desire to be a missionary of like, I want to do this because God expects that of me. And then even realizing by me doing that, that's part of colonizing. That's part of saying you have to believe and have the hermeneutics that the white culture says that you need to have, or else you're not saved. And how even for me to separate out of that, of how my faith was trying to advance that white movement and ideology.
Yeah.
And how it's so baked into culture that many times we don't see it. So I love seeing how it is being talked about more and how more people are starting to be aware of it. And we're able to hold spaces for the diversity within the BIPOC community, because we've done a lot of harm.
Yes, and shout out to Mandisa Thomas of Black Nonbelievers and Jeremiah Camara, documentary filmmaker and founder of Slave Sermons. And they have both spoken at the Conference on Religious Trauma on different occasions, and fully recognize how the church and Christianity absolutely hijacked and took over Black culture, and how difficult it is then for people to reject Christianity, and when that's if the whole community is centered around that. So I am grateful that there are more and more people all the time who are diving into this work and getting the word out there. I wonder for you about feminism. What was that like for you, like encountering in your studies? Because it's so foreign to the way that we were raised in conservative Christianity.
Yes. Well, it's something that I'm honestly still wrapping my mind around, which sounds really weird to me. But growing up, like if there was any hint of feminism or women standing up for themselves, it was very dismissed. It was looked at. It was created. And, oh, look, this is women trying to usurp men. Like it was just,
it's the devil.
You just don't do it. And then like, it's so, I hate it because like part of me again is another space where I feel like the education I got and the information I received was so inadequate or not accurate, because I wasn't taught anything about women's history. There wasn't like, it was just void. And so it wasn't until I really started getting out into the world and even exploring like my own dynamics I went through to be like, why am I experiencing life different? Why did I growing up wished I was a guy? Like, why did I want that? Because you have privilege. Because you didn't have to wear nylons. Like I wanted to have, I see the benefits of what it's like. And so even coming to terms of what does this mean? And then even realizing, I think it was like 3 years ago where I was like, oh, women couldn't get their own credit cards until like 1976.
Yes.
What? That was not that long ago.
No.
And then even like with the Roe v. Wade, where I'm like, why was women's rights not protected? Like why we were waiting on this, and just seeing like, how does that impact me and other women and other uterus owners of like, we have to go through this and people are dictating what we do with our bodies and we don't have agency. And it's more than the propaganda of trying to say, oh, well, it's both lives matter. And it's just like, is it? Because you also aren't valuing me when I'm going through abuse and trauma, and you're dictating what I do. Like, this is not valuing me. Like, you could value me by supporting me, by helping tend to all the contextual societal issues going on to support me. But no, you're just dictating what I should do with my body. Like, it's just very interesting of like that shift and learning how to have a voice. And also knowing that there's going to be pushback because of gender, and even seeing within some Christian cultures of where you start seeing more women standing up within pastoral dynamics and seeing the culture just attack them. And I think for me, it's very telling to see some of those ideologies that are more shaping the religion when that happens. Because it's like, oh, wait, like, are you saying that because a woman stands up and preaches that now the gospel is distorted? Because then really you're saying that the woman's gender trumps God. It trumps God's word. It trumps the Bible. So women are more powerful than God when that happens. Like, and God can't use. So it's like, this is like really shifting what you profess to believe. And so I think like that, as hard as it is to see some of those dynamics, I think it really starts to tease out where these ideologies are coming from and how it shapes what we believe and how the Bible's been interpreted. And then even down to our family systems of how do they function and how do we make meaning? Because I even remember it was so weird, but it's like in college, I went to this community church because we were mandated to go to churches for college credit. And so you go, and there was this woman pastor, and it's like you get this whole like experience of like, oh no, bad things are going to happen. The devil is in church, and just all, and it's like how much of that was created or fostered because my nervous system and my emotions were hijacked from the culture, that it created this space of like, I'm in an unsafe space where it's really not the case. Like it's just that priming that has been taught for so long.
Right. Well, I wonder for you, something that was helpful for me was, pardon me, starting to explore non-Christian religions and other, I got my air quotes going, sacred books, sacred texts, and teachings from many different times, many different cultures. So previously, my thought would have been those were all just either the devil at work, or some might have been precursors, how Jonah was a type of Christ. Again, and got my air quotes going, that maybe these religions were as well. And so that was very expansive for me, giving myself permission to explore what other cultures thought.
Absolutely. Like the older I get, the more I find I value dialogue, especially with people who are different, because it makes me reflect more on what I believe and why do I believe what I believe, but also hear difference. And it's been shocking to me. I say shocking, it's also not, but it's also shocking of how I find more acceptance and space for me to question out with people outside of the religious community than my own community. Like I get a lot of, you shouldn't be doing that. It's bad. It's evil. It's sin. You're going to hell. Like you can't trust yourself. Satan trusted God and he's this. So how can you? And so it's like that constant, like second guessing myself, where outside of the religious bubble, there's so much diversity and so much like, we're able to honor other people's experiences and this is what I believe and what do you believe? And so we can have more of this honest dialogue and discourse, which to me helps deepen what I believe and even how I connect with myself and others, where I feel like within the Christian culture, it tends to be more surface level because we're not able to have that difference to really dive in to deeper topics. It's just so quickly spiritually bypassed.
Yeah, there's a lot of judgment there, I find as well. I remember, so I was raised Pentecostal, and we maybe would look at the Baptists or the Presbyterians and call them the chosen frozen, God's chosen frozen, like they're, or maybe Catholics even was really sketchy. Oh, they might get into heaven, but I don't know, like skin of your teeth type thing. We were so judgmental.
Yes. It's painful, like looking back, but then like it's crazy. I say it's crazy, but it's not. But it's like that internal space of like, we have what is truth, we have what's right. And so now we have to protect it, but then we also have to bring others into the fold because they're wrong, even though there's so many denominations. And so like within the IFB culture, we're the only one that's right. Like even everyone else, even though you admit that Jesus is God, you're still wrong because you're not IFB.
Right.
Like, and how there's all of that adding to things. And like, I remember having an argument with one of my classmates who is Catholic in middle school. And she's just like, we pray to Mary. I'm like, well, you can't be Christian. There's no way you can be Christian if you pray to Mary. Like, it doesn't work that way. Like, and so it's just interesting how it almost, the theology that is taught creates such a rigid bubble that you can't even connect with other people. You can't, like, it almost breaks your brain. And then it's like, you just have to keep going back to what you were taught. And even like the apologetics of how we were taught of just like this, it's not really how do you work out your faith and know what you believe. It's you just regurgitate what other people have said and you just throw it at people. I mean, I remember getting so frustrated with people because they're just like, oh, I don't believe the Bible. Okay, great. Quote, all scripture is given by God and is profitable. Great. They still don't believe the Bible. Like quoting the Bible is not going to change anything. Like what? Well, it doesn't return without void. The Holy Spirit, you planted the seed. And I'm just like, do you not understand how humans work? Like that, even conversation, like this is not, this is bad.
Yeah.
Not good communication.
I feel like a big part of maturing and maturity is growing beyond rigidity and authoritarian. When we're children, that's kind of part of what keeps us safe. Because if parents say, don't run out in traffic, and if you do, here's what's going to happen. Oh, okay, so I'm not going to do that thing. And we do tend to, as children, adopt our parents' views on things as the right way. My dad can beat up your dad type of thing. And then we mature in our teens and into adulthood, and we start to see that the world is so much more than simply black and white thinking, that there are shades and nuances and all those things in there. And that can feel scary when we have felt really safe with very firm rules. And of course, because we were also taught the heart is deceitful and wicked above all else, or however that goes. So then we also have trouble trusting ourselves. It's a wonder anybody makes it out of religion into a healthy life.
And even I keep saying I have my little IFB voice because it's constantly in the background just telling me all this stuff because it's been so ingrained. And even throughout this conversation, I keep hearing oh, well, narrow is the way to heaven. And you're talking about color and freedom and acceptance and that's too wide. And no, but you have to be miserable. It has to be hard. You have to be struggling. Also, if you're struggling, it's because you're sinning. So you need to change that. And you need to it's just
wow,
but
so much indoctrination.
Yes. And it's there's so much color. There's so much. I'm able to breathe, which is so crazy because I'm just breathing helps me think better. Imagine it, right? But it's you stay in this culture where it's I can't breathe. I'm just being suffocated and I have to just focus. And it just keeps hijacking our thought processes, our developmental processes, our relational processes. That then it's when we're able to step out and we can start breathing, it's now I can become more embodied and make healthier choices and can think through things. I don't have to feel the pressure. I don't have to have the answer today. I can still think about it and I can still talk. My decision today may be changed tomorrow.
Beautiful.
And there's okay.
Love it. Yes. And I liken it, my deconversion or my extimony. It's I was a beach ball being held under the water for so long and the pressure builds and builds and builds. And then finally take your hands off, whoop, up it comes, very messy. People getting splattered everywhere with the water. But yeah, just that sense of pressure. And then like you say, being able to take a deep breath and breathe and start to experience. And one thing I tell my clients is that if life is like a giant buffet table and all these plates as far as the eye can see, and they all represent experiences, and fundamentalist religion, including Christianity, would have us starve to death right at that buffet table. Just tell us we can only have one tiny dish for the rest of our life. That's what it, and people stay hooked in that. So I'm very excited that you have been able to make your way out, make sense of things, figure things out. And now you also have a practice where you're helping other people on their journeys. That's so cool.
Yes, I hope I'm helping.
How can people find you? What's the name of your business?
My company is Hope for Healing Therapy. It is located in Kansas City. I'm dually licensed in Kansas and Missouri, because I'm right on state line. And my practice is very different because I do in-home therapy. I love it. And it's not very common. But I find, especially the demographics I really like to work with, struggle finding transportation or daycare services or just within work schedules. So it's a little easier for me to go to them. And plus, I don't have to pay for rent, which is also nice. And I find it helps me put my clients more in context instead of pulling them out into my office and see more of a controlled space, that I get to join in their spaces, which is also can be very vulnerable. And so trying to, I aim to make sure I'm being very honoring and respectful of their space. And also it helps me see their dynamics very differently because they present differently in their home space than they do
it's
in
so
an
true.
office setting. And then also, I think for me, like I'm able to help explore different interventions within their area instead of like putting in like saying, hey, this works within my office setting, so now apply it at home, and how there's like some dissonance with that. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it's different, but I love it. I've been
You make
doing it.
house calls.
I do.
I
I'm
love
concierge.
So great. That's so cool. And you're absolutely right. People present differently when they're in their own space, and you can kind of get a feeling for what their life is like. If it's very chaotic or what's going on there, what are the demands on them? I just think that's fantastic. And I would love to be able to share links with our watchers and listeners, our viewers, about the power and control wheel. Is that something that I can share with people at this point? Okay, good.
Yep, I have it pre-printed, so it already has a DOI number and it's copyrighted, so people can still use it while I'm trying to figure out how to get it published.
Excellent.
I've decided after this one journal, if they deny me, then I'm just going to step over and do like more self-publication and write a book or something and not have to keep doing this. I'm like, it has been peer reviewed by so many people. Like,
Yeah.
it is peer reviewed. It's just getting through that bias, but also I think some people don't want to go towards it because it is pretty big, especially in America right now.
Yeah, that's why I think it's even more important. I don't want you to give up on that. I think it's fantastic. It's very interesting. I think it really helps people put things into perspective. So I will be referring people to it and to you because I think it's marvelous.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, for me, I think it helped me explore my faith in a different way. It's not just what God says, it's also how is culture and our meaning making affecting how we're seeing God and connecting. So that gives me more choice in what I believe, because it's not just what someone says against someone else, but also recognizing for me, I'm like, this wheel can translate to other cultures. It's just looking at what ideologies are within that culture. And so people start to get more curious because for me, when you talk about culture, I had no idea what that meant. I'm like, it's just food and it's music. And like, what are you meaning culture? And so really diving into being like, okay, wow, like this is really how culture is shaping our meaning making. And so now when we're talking to people, we can explore it in a different way instead of, let's not just correlate it to the Bible. Let's step it back, or let's step it back and like see like, we're looking at relationship structure. So let's look at the patriarchy and male and female within this space, or how we even talk about gender and sexuality and how we relate to our own sexuality and what was taught in that space. Because my hope is that I can help advance the conversation around religious trauma, and even how as we as humans make meaning and shift, hopefully from the fundamentalist perspectives into a more healthier, more nuanced space. And in the end, people have choice. They got to do what they want to do. So at least the information is out there.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to have you back for a part 2 where we talk about culture and meaning making, and you go a little bit more into this wheel that you've created. It's been such a joy talking with you today. Thank you, Naomi.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, and thanks everyone for watching or listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.